the head and heart of our keynote speaker, Mickey Lemle, suffused every frame in the inspiring documentaries he creates. Mickey's films highlight the spiritual and contemplative as forces for change, far more powerful than any war or political movement could be. Through their indelible portraits, they celebrate the power of an individual to reshape the world. Today, as we think about the past, the present, and the future, there's a piece of the Lemle family history I'm delighted to recount. Edna, Mickey's mother, graduated in 1933, the year of Felix Adler's death. Mickey graduated in 1965, and his son Aaron graduated in 2009. So the past, the present, and the future in the Lemle family history. It is a privilege to welcome Mickey Lemle and his family back to Fieldston.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for bringing my mother into this auditorium. Good morning. The last time I stood alone on this stage about to address a full auditorium, I was in 5th grade here at Ethicsl, and I'd been asked to sing a solo for the Christmas assembly. And here I am again. So you might say it's becoming something of a habit. Back then, in 1957, 58, the saying above me said, "The place where men come to seek the highest is holy ground." And then somewhere along the line between when I graduated from Ethicsl and my son Aaron in the 90s started coming to these assemblies, it changed to the way you see it today. And I remember, like probably many of you, being in these seats scores of times, looking up at that, and wondering, what does that actually mean, to seek the highest? What is the highest? And when I was here, I didn't actually know, and I didn't even give it too much thought. But in the last few decades, I've had the great privilege of being able to make movies about some of the great beings on our planet. And almost all of them, I could say, seek the highest in their lives, in their work, and in their ways that they influence others. And I've come to think that the highest that we can aspire to is to participate in the transformation and evolution of human consciousness. Now, I'm fortunate when I'm making a movie about these people to spend a lot of time with them beforehand, researching the movie, spend weeks with them actually filming it. But then I get to spend months sitting, looking at an editing machine, pondering their words, thinking about their thoughts, their ideas, their experiences. I was in the middle of editing a movie I did about 20 years ago about the Dalai Lama. And he came to New York, and he was giving a talk up at the Asia Society on Park Avenue one afternoon. So I went to hear him. And it was a very nice dialogue with the president of the Asia Society. And after about an hour and a half, the president started to wrap up the talk, thanking His Holiness. At which point the person behind me shouted out, "Your Holiness, what's the meaning of life?" Now, in a New York nanosecond, I had a judgment about that person. And I can say, well, I can't actually say what my judgment was, not in this hallowed hall on this auspicious day. Needless to say, it was not kind. But then, in a Tibetan nanosecond, which actually takes a lot longer than a New York nanosecond, the Dalai Lama actually answered him. And he said, happiness. The purpose of life is happiness. But then he went on to say, not happiness that you get from getting more stuff, more money, more position, more popularity. It's happiness that you derive by helping others so that they can become happy. And then he went on to say that happiness really exists inside of you. And the way to get there is to overcome your own negative emotions, your afflictive emotions of anger, greed, jealousy, ignorance. Well, I like that answer so much, in spite of my initial judgment, that the next time I was in India a couple of months later filming an interview with him, I asked him the same question, and he gave me a similar answer, which is in the movie. I also made a movie about a man named Sir Lawrence Vanderpost. Sir Lawrence was a wonderful South African writer. He wrote the first anti-apartheid book there. And he said to me, he was also an advisor to Prince Charles and godfather to Prince William, the future King of England. He said to me, it's not about happiness or unhappiness, because those things come and go. He said, what I learned in the camp was that it's about meaning. If your life has meaning, then you'll feel like you belong. The camp he was referring to was a prisoner of war camp in Java during World War II. He was there leading a commando unit when he was captured by the Japanese and thrown into this very brutal prisoner of war camp. Well, the day he got there, he did a tour of the camp, and he saw that conditions were so bad and the morale was so low that he said, oh no, this won't do. So he called all the men in the camp together, they had a meeting, and he turned the camp into a university. They taught 144 different classes every week. Almost 2,000 men enrolled. They wrote out the textbooks on Japanese toilet paper. And after 3.5 years, some of the men actually matriculated. And so they had a ceremony, they had a graduation, and they wrote out their diplomas on the Japanese toilet paper. After the war, 6 of the men actually got jobs in the British Foreign Service based on their toilet paper diplomas. So from the outside, looking at it from the outside, being a prisoner of war is a very powerless position. But by seeking the highest at that moment, Sir Lawrence not only transformed his own experience, but the experience of at least 2,000 prisoners, a lot of the Japanese prison guards, and certainly the administration of the camp. As a matter of fact, when the Japanese surrendered, the head of the camp, the commandant, surrendered his samurai sword and the camp to Sir Lawrence, even though he wasn't the highest ranking officer among the prisoners, which would have been traditional. He said, it's because you're the moral leader of this camp. Now, I also made a movie about a man named Ram Dass. He was born, Richard Alpert, into a prominent Jewish family in Boston. He was a professor of psychology at Harvard. And he left Harvard, went to India, met a very powerful teacher who gave him the name Ram Dass, which means servant of God. Ram Dass says that the purpose of life is to get as close as possible to God, to try to see the world as God sees it. And also to move beyond identifying yourself with your body, your personality, your possessions, your position, but rather identify with the energy that informs all of those things. Because those things are all going to pass. They're all going to end at some point. But the energy that comes through you as you, is eternal and doesn't die. Now, I never met anybody who knew more about gods and goddesses and mythology than Joseph Campbell. A wonderful scholar and author. He wrote a book called Hero with 1,000 Faces, which a young filmmaker named George Lucas attributes all of the Star Wars movies to that book. Now, conversations with Joe were just wonderful. They were really far-ranging. And I remember one day we were having lunch together, and we were having one of these wonderful conversations. And in the midst of it, he turned to me and he said, well, you do know what the meaning of life is, don't you? Remind me, I said to Joe. He said, the meaning of life is whatever you define it to be.